They offered atonement when they killed animals for food. They thought they would come back as animals, and they knew they had to be good to other creatures. Even after domestication occurred and practices like animal sacrifice, which was largely done by the clergy, animals were killed, but they were supposed to be perfectly kept. They were supposed to be unblemished. They were supposed to be killed quickly, and it was usually a meat distribution system. So even in activities historically that we think of as at odds with animal care, there was always a bond that was exhibited at some level. And that human-animal bond is such a powerful force, and Meg Olmert spoke about it today. It actually has a biochemical basis. We are naturally connected to animals. E.O. Wilson talked about biophilia, that we are drawn to life, like a moth is drawn to a light. We are connected to other creatures. It's something that I felt as a little kid, and I'm sure so many of you felt as a child. Not thinking of the animals as different in all ways and unworthy, but different in the best of ways. Beautiful fur and beautiful eyes and athletic. And why would you ever want to harm those creatures? Even before the first humane organizations were formed in the 19th century, there was an instinctive reaction against cruelty. Maine in 1821, 45 years before the first humane organization was formed, passed an anti-cruelty statute. A dozen states passed anti-cruelty laws before the ASPCA was formed in 1866. Henry Bergh and Caroline Earl White, who founded the Pennsylvania SPCA, and George Angel, who founded the MSPCA. My colleague Bernie Untee calls them the founding triumvirate of the 19th century American animal protection movement. These were visionary people who saw that animals were at risk. They wanted to do something about it. But they were building on themes that were already existing in the culture. They were tapping into an instinctive sentiment against animal cruelty. And they were joined by others like Henry Salt, who encouraged people, quote, to recognize the common bond of humanity that unites all living beings in one universal brotherhood, asserting with conviction that, quote, the great republic of the future will not confine its beneficence to man. In the 19th century, we saw an emerging ethos about animals. We saw the rise of pet keeping as cities formed and people became more separated from nature. They craved animals in their lives through pet keeping and other experiences. But at the same time, our movement, like most social movements, was born out of crisis. It was born out of crisis in the 19th century, in the early period of industrialization, when there were no limits and there were no laws, and there was rampant exploitation of animals. Whether it was the slaughter of the bison that Chairman Rahal is working so hard today to fight the modern manifestations of that problem. In the 19th century, there were tens of millions of bison killed in just a 30-year period. They dropped from more than 40 million animals, it was estimated, to just 500 animals because markets were developing their hides and their tongues and new transportation systems and repeating firearms. The passenger pigeon, there were billions of them. And in the span of just a few decades, they were gone, extinct, extirpated from this planet because of greed and selfishness and an alienation from nature and a loss of that bond. It really took, though, until the second half of the century for the humane movement to get going because our nation needed to deal with the huge issue of chattel slavery. You know, we saw in the modern era the growth of political movements based on the rights of the individual. The Declaration of the Rights of Man, our own American Declaration of Independence, was a new form of political thought, shedding away monarchy and shedding away the old systems, the caste systems, and recognizing the integrity of the individual, that everybody mattered. And those political documents really forged this new political idea, which was a political revolution of sorts. And of course then, the talk and the action had to get synced. And we had to deal with this terrible question of slavery. And when that was dealt with in the United States in 1865, it was no accident that the first humane groups started in 1866. And it was no accident that the leaders of the humane movement came out of the abolition movement. Men like Anthony Ashley Cooper, known as the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury in the UK. He said, "I was convinced that God had called me to devote whatever advantages he might have bestowed upon me to the cause of the weak, the helpless, both man and beast, and those who had none to help them." And the great evangelical William Wilberforce, who said, quote, "If to be feeling alive to the suffering of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, I am one of the more incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large." And we saw the other revolution that was occurring was a revolution in our understanding of animals. And it received a great boost in 1859 with Darwin, who talked about the emotions of animals. He wrote, summarizing the studies of animals in the wild, that mammals experience, quote, anxiety, grief, dejection, despair, joy, love, tender feelings, devotion, ill temper, sulkiness, determination, hatred, anger, disdain, contempt, disgust, pride, helplessness, patience, surprise, astonishment, fear, horror, shame, shyness, and modesty. Those are the same feelings that we have. And he saw all of those emotions in animals. Yet in the subsequent decades and in much of the 20th century, we also saw a scientific reaction against that. It was behaviorism. And it was the idea that animals just operate by instinct, that they are in an endless struggle for food and mates and reproduction, as if there's nothing in life. Jonathan Balcom said it was a joyless struggle. That was the view that the behaviorists had, that animals were just kind of programmed to pursue all of these few things in life, the essentials of life, as if they were automatons and they were devoid of consciousness. But it was in the 1970s when Donald Griffin spoke about animal consciousness and animal cognition. And in these last 40 years, we've seen just a flowering of study about animals and recognizing whether it's Alex the gray parrot, who is capable of so much speech and expressions of thought, understanding concepts like bigger and smaller and same and different. He knew so many objects by name, and he could describe colors and shapes of objects. Or whether it was a border collie named Rico, who astounded scientists in 2004 by demonstrating the ability not only to recognize the meaning of more than 200 words, but also to infer the names of items she hadn't previously seen. Or Ayuma, a 5-year-old chimp, this is also in Jonathan's book, who was put up against a British memory champion, Ben Pridmore, who was able to, after 30 seconds, remember the order of all the cards in a shuffled deck. Ayuma and Ben squared off. Numbers were flashed on a screen very quickly, and the test was to see how many they could remember. When the numbers flashed for just a fifth of a second, Ayuma the chimp corrected and recalled all 9 digits 90% of the time, compared to 33% for Pridmore. So this revolution in political thinking, this revolution in science, but why don't we have more progress on these issues? And I think the answer is there are entrenched interests who want to stop progress on animal welfare. There are folks who take a static view of the world and want to continue to do things just as they've been done in the past. And as I said, for every animal interest out there, there's an animal advocate or an animal organization fighting for them. There's also the converse. For every type of animal use, there is some special interest or organization that's devoted to keeping things just the same.